Sir, 3, 2, 1. So you are live. You can start the session. Over to you.
Thank you and good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be speaking on this topic of heart failure management, in which we will be focusing also on the elderly population. But before I actually reach there, I thought I must give you a background of the uh, how the concept of pharmacological therapy of heart failure management evolved, especially keeping a focus on beta blockers today. So, if we know the definition of heart failure, well, to keep it very straightforward and simple, it's a complex clinical syndrome that results from any structural or functional impairment of the ventricular filling or ejection of blood. Uh, it's cardinally manifested by symptoms of breathlessness, fatigue, and fluid retention or edema, as we know. Now, if you look at the definition of heart failure in a more broader perspective, we'll see that the definition has primarily been defined based on the ejection fraction so as to broadly create two subgroup of patients. One, those with reduced ejection fraction, namely less than or equal to 40%, and the other is the heart failure with preserved ejection fraction, or as it's called HFpEF, wherein patients have a EF of 50% or more. However, there is a mid-range or a borderline group also where you have an EF of 41 to 49% of the ejection fraction, wherein these patients fall into a borderline or a group where their characteristics, treatment patterns, and outcomes are by and large those of patients with HFpEF. And then you have another group in which the HFrEF, the reduced EF group, actually tends to improve, and then it tends to be labeled as HFpEF improved. That means they were reduced EF ejection fraction patients, which now have come up to a relatively safer range. The classification of heart failure, we are very well versant. The functional classification we use in our clinical practice day in, day out of NYHA class 1, 2, 3, and 4. But we probably don't write or very clearly specify is the stages of heart failure, in which the stages are divided into stage A, B, C, and D. A is essentially a stage where patients have risks for heart failure but don't have any structural heart disease. For example, having the conventional risk factors for atherosclerosis like hypertension, dyslipidemia, hypercholesterol, diabetes, uh, smoking, obesity, etc. Stage B is a state where you have developed a structural heart disease of LV dysfunction, but there are no signs and symptoms of heart failure. In stage C, the patients have structural heart disease with prior or current symptoms of heart failure. And stage D is essentially a stage of refractory heart failure, which requires specialized interventions where patients beyond guideline directed medical therapy have then to be treated with certain interventional procedures. However, we will not be discussing treatments of stage D today, but we will focus mostly on treatments of stage B and stage C of heart failure. So based on this, the phenotypes, the stages phenotypes, the treatment of heart failure have been very well defined and designed by the American Heart Association, ACC, American College of Cardiology guidelines. And we will actually focus on basically stage B and stage C. And in that also, of all the pharmacological treatments which we now know, we'll certainly focus on the topic under discussion today, which is beta blockers. But before I come to beta blockers, we must understand that heart failure is a condition in which you have excessive neurohormonal activation, which essentially is either that of the sympathetic nervous system or the renin angiotensin aldosterone system. And so based on the neurohormonal activation, you find at various in the various limbs of the neurohormonal axis, you find how the drugs, which are the frontline drugs in heart failure, namely beta blockers, ACE inhibitors, or angiotensin receptor blockers, and then the MRAs or the mineralocorticoid receptor antagonists, how they all work in this continuum of the disease. But beta blockers is one particular group of drugs which, if you look at the continuum of the cardiovascular continuum, starting from the risk factors to onset of asymptomatic structural heart disease, then going on to symptomatic coronary artery disease, manifesting either in its advanced stages with coronary thrombosis, leading on to myocardial infarction, which leads on to muscle loss, negative left ventricular remodeling, thereafter leading on to left ventricular enlargement and symptoms of heart failure before the final demise. You will find that beta blockers are one group of drugs which act probably along the complete circle of the cardiovascular continuum can be served by beta blockers. So the classification and recommendations and levels of evidence is something which we have learned in our guidelines directed medical therapy. I will not spend too much time explaining this, but suffice is to say what we discussed today will either be all class 1 or class 2A. That means which the benefits of the therapies are well established, and they are much more than the risks associated with the treatment, and the basis for this is based on the data from multiple randomized controlled trials, or maybe a data derived from a single large randomized controlled trial. So as I said, I'm not going to focus too much on stage A heart failure, wherein you are dominantly addressing only the risk factors of heart failure. But we will go on to and discuss and look at the recommendations for treatment of, say, stage B heart failure. And as we all understand, in patients who have a history of myocardial infarction and reduced ejection fraction, drugs which are used in this group of population are the ACE inhibitors or ARBs in ACE intolerant patients, or beta blockers, and thereafter statins, uh, and so this dominantly completes the class 1 classification, the class 1 care of classification of recommendations for drugs which have to be used in stage B heart failure. Dominantly means ACE inhibitors, beta blockers, and angiotensin receptor blockers in the ACE intolerant population. And of course, uh, it is believed that in patients with myocardial infarction, statins should also be used to prevent heart failure. Now let's look at stage C heart failure with reduced ejection fraction. As I told, we'll all be discussing level of evidence class 1 recommendations, where level of evidence is A. So ACE inhibitors or ARBs and beta blockers, they form the cornerstone of therapy for treating heart failure. If these patients have additional volume overload and are in advanced functional class, then obviously the class 1 loop diuretics have to be recommended. However, in certain races like the African Americans, beyond ACE and ARBs, sometimes you need to add drugs like hydralazine and nitrates for better optimal outcomes. And this is based on all data from randomized controlled trials. Importantly, one must understand when to use aldosterone antagonists like eplerenone and spironolactone. And these are essentially those subset of patients who are class 2 to class 4 functional NYHA class, provided they have a creatinine clearance of more than 30 ml per minute. Remember, this is a very generous creatinine clearance guidelines which have been given for using aldosterone antagonists. Of course, keeping in mind that these patients should not either have hyperkalemia or should not develop hyperkalemia during the course of their treatments. So if we look at the guidelines for management of say stage C heart failure, well, diuretics find class 1 recommendation. ACE inhibitors also are recommended for all patients with HFrEF, and ACE ARBs are recommended in patients with HFrEF who are ACE intolerant. This is where beta blockers find their place in management of stage C heart failure. So using beta blockers, one of the three beta blockers, that means the beta blockers which have been proven to have a defined role in HFrEF are carvedilol, metoprolol, and bisoprolol. The other beta blockers are not really recommended as frontline drugs for treating heart failure patients. But let me take you, how did this beta blocker saga begin? How did we begin to realize that a drug like beta blocker, which essentially has negative inotropic and chronotropic properties, could actually be used in a condition where the heart failure or heart ejection fraction or the myocardial properties were already depressed? Well, it started almost 35 years back with this study by Anderson et al., in which 50 patients with dilated cardiomyopathy having ejection fraction of less than 30% were randomized to metoprolol or placebo and followed for 18 months. And it was found that low dose beta blockades were well tolerated by at least 80% of the patients, with a mortality benefit in those who were given metoprolol versus the placebo group, along with a significant improvement in functional class. But then a few years later came the very famous study, the metoprolol in dilated cardiomyopathy study, which actually was a much larger study of 380 plus patients who had an ejection fraction less than 40%. Majority of them were either in class 2 or 3. They were randomized to receive metoprolol in a reasonably high dose of 50 to 75 milligram twice a day. The follow-up was kept at 1 year with the primary endpoint of death or need for cardiac transplantation. And this was the statistically significant benefit which was found at 12 months between the metoprolol and the placebo group, and of the number of patients who reached an endpoint, and this was found to be statistically significant. Similarly, importantly, we found that in this particular study, beta blockers were for the first time demonstrated that in all patients at baseline, from baseline to 6 months and 12 months, you found that there was a good improvement in ejection fraction from the baseline, whether the ejection fraction was less than 20% or it was in the range of 20 to 40%. And if you look at the number of the change in the functional class of these patients who actually received beta blockers, you will find that versus the placebo group, the drug arm reported, at least from, if you look at the moderate, much, and the very much improvement groups, you will find how beta blockers brought about a good amount of improvement in the functional class of this patient population, which was otherwise a very sick population to handle and treat. But the first randomized intervention trial of controlled trial using a extended release beta blocker was the MERIT heart failure trial, in which this extended release metoprolol was introduced in patients with heart failure, advanced heart failure, all from class 2 to class 4, with the objective to find out whether these beta blockers could reduce mortality and all-cause hospitalization in this very sick population. The age criteria in this was 40 to 80 years. And when I say I focus on the age, remember we are talking about heart failure in the elderly population as well. But as I'll show you in the subsequent slides, possibly the elderly patients are not very well focused or targeted in these heart failure trials. So in any case, this particular trial enrolled patients in the age of 40 to 80 years. They were sick patients up to NYHA class 4. And Their resting heart rates had to be more than 68 per minute with a supine systolic blood pressure of at least 100 millimeters per mercury. And when they were followed up for nearly 1.5 to 2 years, well, metoprolol was titrated from 12.5 milligram going up to 25 and finally up to 200 milligrams versus placebo. And the mean dose of metoprolol, remember, is a very high dose, which we rarely use in our clinical practice, of 179 milligram in patients with systolic heart failure, LV systolic dysfunction or HFrEF. So this is not a very commonly used average dose which we use in our population, but this trial clearly showed us that if you use metoprolol titrated very carefully and up titrated very carefully at 2 weeks interval, well, you could, over a period of almost 1.5 to 2 years, you could bring about a 34% reduction in total mortality, a 38% reduction in cardiovascular deaths, a 41% reduction in sudden deaths, which were obviously arrhythmic in nature, and heart failure deaths also reduced by almost 50%. So this was a big boost which was given to our pharmacological armamentarium by showing that metoprolol in heart failure could bring about such dramatic positive outcomes in this sick patient population. Then came the other beta blocker, which is carvedilol. Now, carvedilol, remember, is a combination of both a beta and an alpha antagonist. It's both a beta 1 and a beta 2 receptor and an alpha receptor antagonist. So if you look at the US carvedilol heart failure program, in which this drug was used for the first time in 1996, you will find that versus the placebo, the carvedilol brought about a nearly a 65% reduction in mortality, number one. And of course, the progression of heart failure and the reduction of sudden cardiac deaths was also something very prominently noticed in patients who were treated with carvedilol. But the sicker population certainly came in a concept that could, like metoprolol, could carvedilol also be used in class 4 patients effectively like metoprolol, and could carvedilol therapy be initiated during hospitalization for congestive heart failure? Well, Copernicus trial did show that if you, with very sick ejection fraction patients having less than 25%, very severe heart failure, functional class 3 or 4, patients whether having ischemic or non-ischemic cardiomyopathy, once they were stabilized with diuretics and ACE inhibitors, whether or not they received digoxin or amiodarone, these patients were slowly introduced with carvedilol in a dose of 3.125 milligram twice a day, and the up titration was performed while the patients were in the hospital, and they were up titrated to about after every 2 weeks, and then these patients were followed up for 2 years. Now remember, this trial, even though majority of the up titration in this particular trial was done in OPD in IPD basis, but this did give us the confidence that we could, one, start beta blocker therapy in this sick population, discharge these patients and titrate their therapies of heart failure beta blockade escalation while the patients followed up with us in the OPD departments. So the Copernicus trial showed that your all-cause mortality reduced significantly versus placebo over the next 18 to 21 months. The first effect in the 8 weeks of death, hospitalization, and permanent withdrawal of beta blockers was very well tolerated with carvedilol versus placebo. And similarly, if you looked at this particular effect of death, hospitalization, and withdrawal of drugs in the highest risk patients, which constituted mostly the elderly population and those with CKD, well, you found that carvedilol was also equally effective in this group as well. That means carvedilol 1 was tolerated very well, and the effects of the primary endpoints came in set in as early as from the starting from 8 weeks of the onset of the therapy. So this study demonstrated that even in the most sick patients, carvedilol therapy would result in significant clinical benefits. And this life-saving therapy could be initiated very early once you had volume stabilized your patients in the hospital. So which is the better of the two drugs? Is it carvedilol or metoprolol in heart failure? Which one would we prefer? Well, the COMET trial in 2002 did try to address this issue by by using double-blind carvedilol or metoprolol in again more than 3,000 patient population who were followed up for more than 5 years. And the dose of carvedilol and metoprolol were pretty stiff in this study as well. Metoprolol, remember, was used almost 100 milligrams a day, and carvedilol also was used 25 milligram twice a day, which is quite a stiff dose for considering patients of heart failure sometimes may not tolerate these high doses. But certainly the titration, up titration was done gradually, and then these patients were followed up. The baseline characteristics in both carvedilol and metoprolol groups were almost well matched. And the dose, as I mentioned, against 50 milligrams, well, the mean dose was 41.8, and against 100, the mean dose was about 85 milligrams, which is a pretty good dose to assess the clinical effects of. So between the beta blockers, carvedilol proved superior to metoprolol by reducing total mortality by 17%. Importantly, even though the non-cardiovascular deaths were not influenced between the two beta blockers, but the cardiovascular deaths again were were lowered much greater with carvedilol than with metoprolol. So this was another example where carvedilol apparently looked superior to metoprolol in reduction of cardiovascular mortality. Similarly, when you look at other composite endpoints, you find that again carvedilol again had a better hazard ratio of at least improving long-term outcomes by at least 12% over metoprolol. And also with respect to the onset of diabetes or new onset diabetes, we found that patients who were treated with carvedilol over a period of 5 years, the relative risk of developing diabetes was reduced by almost 23%. And importantly, both drugs were very well tolerated in this, and the drug withdrawals were not really much different between the carvedilol and the metoprolol group. Excuse me. So if we look at so if we look at the combined the consensus from the heart failure or low ejection fraction beta blocker trials, well, I have discussed. I cannot discuss each trial in detail, but I have tried to just say give my opinion on metoprolol and carvedilol. But certainly there are other drugs as well. For example, bisoprolol is another wonderful trial, which was again done practically about the same time as MERIT heart failure trial. Even though this was slightly, this trial also had a good amount of patient population, addressed a very sick subset of patients, mostly of ischemic etiology of 50%, a good mean follow-up of 15 months, and over a period of time, you found that look at the numbers needed to treat to save one life in 1 year are pretty impressive with both bisoprolol, metoprolol, but majority, the most of it was well superior in terms of NNT was with carvedilol. But again, as I said, you just can't compare these trials because of different, even though the patient populations and all were by and large they were heart failure patient population, but the study design, the patient subsets and all were very different. And therefore, you just can't say that one drug would be superior to the other, even though head-to-head comparison of carvedilol and metoprolol in the COMET study does give us a impression as if carvedilol could be superior to metoprolol in this subset of patient population. So beta blockers, if we now look at, well, they are used in stages. They are not, remember, beta blockers are not the recommended drugs dominantly for stage A, but they would dominantly be recommended for stage B and C, and obviously in some patients of class D as well, who could tolerate beta blockers unless they are contraindicated. We understand that beta blockers decrease cardiovascular mortality, morbidity, and they should be recommended even if patient has concomitant diabetes, asthma, COPD, or peripheral vascular disease, keeping in mind that whether we are using the selective or the non-selective beta blockers. In patients who have diabetes with recurrent hypoglycemia, reactive airway disease, we should be using beta blockers with or resting limb ischemia. We should be using beta blockers. As I said, they are indicated, but they should be used with caution. We should not use beta blockers in asthmatics who have active bronchospasm, or so also should we not be using these drugs in case the bradycardia or hypertension are marked. So clearly, considering that three important beta blockers have been studied in heart failure and have been found useful, mostly in patients with class 2 and 3, we believe that these are drug-specific effects and they probably should not be considered a class effect of beta blockers in heart failure. And yes, we must give preference to using carvedilol over other agents in patients with ejection fraction of less than 25% or those needing additional blood pressure lowering requirements. As I said, we must go slow, start low, go slow, and titrate at 2-weekly intervals and try to reach target doses if possible, as long as patient does not have any adverse effects. As I said, guidelines do not recommend one agent over another, but there is no head-to-head mortality comparisons, though COMET trial did try to show that there is a trend towards showing carvedilol as a superior beta blocker over metoprolol. However, it is believed there are critics of the COMET trial who believe that the studies had flaws and therefore clearly you cannot place carvedilol superior to metoprolol in this regard. Importantly, if patients do develop decompensation while on beta blockers, decompensation of heart failure, it is believed that you should not abruptly discontinue beta blockers. You should try to continue maybe in half the dose in most patients, even during exacerbation if possible. Your patients may need a temporary reduction in dose or discontinuation, but gradually these doses are reinstated and patients are put back on the dose as they were before they actually got admitted. So just like ACE inhibitors, ARBs, aldosterone antagonists, they all have their initial and maximum doses. So do beta blockers. And therefore, it's important to realize that if you're using bisoprolol, you must start with 1.25 milligram and you can go up to 10, even though the CIBIS trial of bisoprolol had a dose of 7.5 milligrams. Carvedilol twice a day should be up titrated to up to 50 milligram twice. And even though the mean clinical dose in clinical trials has only been 37 milligrams per day. Controlled release carvedilol, the recommendation guidelines are to start from 10 milligrams and you could go up to 80 milligrams. But remember, controlled release carvedilol has not been tested in clinical randomized controlled trials. It's been the simple carvedilol. And extended release metoprolol or metoprolol succinate, as we call it, can be started from 12.5 and up titrated up to maximum of 200 milligram once a day. So these are some of the important things which as beta blockers we must understand. Now, use of beta blockers in the elderly population is something which has been seen, and with something which the clinical trials have shown that the elderly populations have not really been targeted too well in this clinical condition. However, we believe that yes, the definition of very old, we have seen patients of 65 to 79 years in trials, but the very old patients of more than 80 years or the octogenarians is something which we don't find very often enrolled in heart failure trials. We understand that heart failure is a condition, the incidence of which increases with aging, whether it's in the male population or in the female population. This very impressive Rotterdam study showed how the incidence of heart failure keeps increasing as you age. Even from the time that you cross 80 years and you look at the heart failure incidence in males and females, you will find that as you age, as you grow old, so does the incidence of heart failure. The this population is important. Why? Because one, they are not included much in, they are not included very vigorously in the trials. Two, these patients have a higher mortality rate in age more than 80 years. And we also find that the use of guidelines directed medical therapy is relatively less in patients who cross 80 years of age. So we look at the clinical trials of heart failure. Well, we will find that the mean age is just between 61 to 69 years in all these big mega trials versus versus the 80-year target population which you would like to treat. So you would see that these trials really have not gone into and treated octogenarians to a large extent. But there have been few trials, especially with nebivolol, the seniors trial, in which the inclusion criteria was to take patients more than 70 years, and the mean age in this trial was 76 years, and nearly 1/3 of this patient population had ejection fraction of more than 35%. The others were all who had EF of less than 35%. So 2/3 of this patient population had at least a moderate to severe degree of LV dysfunction. And with a drug like nebivolol, even though this was not a very high volume patients in this versus as we have seen in the previous trials, but it did show that your all-cause death or CV hospitalization and all-cause mortality did reduce by about 12 to 15%. And especially if you look at the population which was less than 75 years, which were who were non-diabetics, they benefited the most. So elderly and the diabetics did not benefit as much from nebivolol as one would have thought. Similarly, there's been this very famous Swedish heart failure registry published in 2019, which again tried to assess the use of beta blockers in patients more than 80 years with HFrEF. That means, and they assessed the all-cause mortality and cardiovascular deaths and heart failure hospitalizations in this very large population of patients more than 80 years. And see, in a country, advanced country like Sweden, 86% of this very elderly patient population received beta blockers, and they were followed up for nearly 1.75 years, and it was found that in both subgroup of patients with more or less than 80 years, the use of beta blockers was associated with reduced overall mortality. And in the propensity scored adjusted models, it was found that both not only overall mortality, but cardiovascular deaths and heart failure hospitalizations were also reduced in this very elderly patient population when beta blockers were used in this uh, heart failure in this patient population. And similarly, if you look at, as I told you, if you look at the propensity scored adjusted models, both CV mortality and heart failure hospitalizations significantly reduced over a period of time of 5 years in these patients with 80 years or more. So it just showed us that how efficacious these drugs could be if we use them judiciously and wisely in this patient population. So this analysis certainly supports these current guidelines that beta blocker therapy in heart failure with reduced ejection fraction patients should be prescribed regardless of age. And if we review the evidence of beta blockers versus the other frontline drugs which are used in heart failure, well, you would find that yes, certainly the numbers needed to treat are certainly more than their counterparts. But if you look carefully and closely, well, you will find that yes, beta blockers are just second to ACE inhibitors only in terms of mortality reduction and prevention of cardiovascular deaths when you treat this patient population with the relevant drugs and continue to treat them over a long period of time. It's important that the duration of therapy be sustained and maintained in this very sick patient population. So to conclude, heart failure is associated with significant morbidity and mortality. ACE inhibitors, ARBs, and beta blockers are the frontline medications which should be used in all patients if possible. Beta blocker therapy continues to be a very important strategy in heart failure management based on the body of evidence we have today in terms of randomized controlled trials with practically a number of beta blockers. It remains one of the very few agents that has actually been shown to save lives in terms of not only affecting total mortality, but reduction of cardiovascular mortality and heart failure deaths as well. And therefore, patients must be followed up closely, and it's important to ensure that they remain adherent to therapy to get maximum benefit of the benefits of the long-term usage of beta blockers. Thank you very much for your attention. If there are any questions, I can take them up.
Sir, there are some questions in chat box.
Okay. So I have the first question. What is the action of beta blocker against COVID? Can we use beta blocker to treat hypertensive patients, or we have to approach Ramipril as asked by Dr. Ishwar Singh? Well, see, the use of beta blockers in COVID is certainly not, there is no contraindication of not to use beta blockers in COVID. There is nothing specific to COVID which would recommend us not to use beta blockers. Remember that beta blockers, wherever we have issues of, as long as patient has no symptomatic hypertension and bradycardia, and patient is in heart failure, whether stage B, C, or D even in certain cases, yes, beta blockers can be used in LV dysfunction if associated, whether LV dysfunction is secondary to COVID myocarditis or is an independent entity existing prior, we can use, there is no issue. Ramipril, of course, is certainly the ACE inhibitors are the recommended drugs as they would be even in patients with COVID. We have no data to say that you should not be using ACE inhibitors or ARBs in this patient population. Dr. Varun Makkad asks, what is the optimal dosage and titration sequencing for ACE inhibitors and beta blockers in treatment of chronic heart failure? Well, as I told you, you must, when you start prescribe these drugs to patients, certainly at 2 to 4 weeks interval, you can be up titrating or down titrating the medication based on how these patients have responded to what are the uh, pros and cons, what are the benefits and side effects, if any, of having increased or reduced the therapies. So certainly that titration and optimal dosing sequence can all be planned and titrated at 2 to 4 weekly intervals. Dr. Gurpreet asks, are all ACE inhibitors and beta blockers equivalent? Well, one would tend to believe that yes, as long as you are using the beta blockers, which are guideline directed and guideline directed evidence based drugs, namely carvedilol, metoprolol, and bisoprolol. And clearly, you cannot be very choosy about, you cannot be clearly favoring one drug over the other. But yes, just like you have now evidence, I think it's practically there with in every class of drugs. For example, in if you look at the early trials of LV dysfunction with ACE inhibitors, well, it all started with the enalapril saga. Then you had lisinopril, captopril, but these days we hardly use these drugs, and it's dominantly we are using ramipril, even though enalapril and lisinopril would still be available. But the largest body of data with ACE inhibitors has been with enalapril, but we continue to use, or we still prefer using ramipril, even though there is nothing detrimental about it. So similarly, I don't think that beta blockers also have that kind of corollary that but for LV dysfunction, yes, I prefer that of these three beta blockers, you could be using any of these three. But in case you have to use beta blockers beyond LV dysfunction, heart failure scenarios of using in hypertension, coronary artery disease to control anginal episodes, then anginal syndromes or episodes, then you could be looking at other drugs like maybe nebivolol. Select cases, people still continue to use atenolol. So I guess they all have their place in our pharmacological armamentarium, as long as we are clear as to which underlying condition we are trying to address with the drug. Well, which maneuver makes the murmur of hypertrophic obstructive cardiomyopathy louder? Well, this is truly not, even though hypertrophic cardiomyopathy could be addressed as a stage B heart failure condition. But yeah, certainly if you're looking or you're trying to find out which murmur of Hocum, which maneuver makes it, well, it's the Valsalva maneuver. And we will certainly not discuss it in interest of time because this is truly out of course of the webinar. ECG changes of hyperkalemia and what can you give to resolve them? Well, the hyperkalemia could come in your heart failure management patients, especially those who are being treated with the MRA drugs, namely the spironolactone or eplerenone and ACE inhibitors or ARBs. The antidotes for them would revolve around using calcium gluconate intravenously or dextrose insulin infusion, or you can use potassium binding resins in your oral potassium binding resins used in your patient population sometimes to treat them. As I mentioned, which beta blockers are used for systolic heart failure mortality reduction? Well, I told you, Dr. Dinesh, that it's with all the three drugs, whether it's carvedilol, metoprolol, or bisoprolol, and to a certain extent, it's been even seen with nebivolol, especially in non-diabetic patients who are less than 75 years of age. So there are some repetitive questions from Dr. Jatin Sharma. I hope, Jatin, your question has been answered about beta blockers in COVID. Dr. Shivam is asking about an early invasive strategy of revascularization in patients with non-STMI or, well, unstable angina. Well, we have taken this into a different direction, but suffices to say, I would say this is out of course, since it very well forms a part of the stage B or of heart failure. But yes, all high-risk patient population, especially the high troponin LV dysfunctions, electrical or mechanical complications being encountered in this patient populations of acute coronary syndromes would necessitate early invasive strategies. There is little doubt about that. Dr. Piyush is asking, what are the causes of ST elevation on ECG besides an acute myocardial infarction? Well, genuine ST elevation with convexity upward is always acute MI. With concavity upwards, it's could be pericarditis. And especially a very important sign which you must look to differentiate between an acute MI and pericarditis would be looking at the lead AVR. If you have a PR segment elevation in lead AVR, you have that's more in favor of pericarditis. If you have a ST segment elevation in lead AVR, that would go in more in favor of an acute myocardial infarction. I am taking into account that early repolarization changes on ECG, which also sometimes look as acute myocardial infarction. Well, we are not taking that into account. I'm not sure. Dr. Tekchand is asking, dear doctor, can we use beta blockers to treat coronary spasm? I would not think so. I would think that the drugs to treat beta blockers to treat coronary vasospasm should be the calcium uh, channel blockers. Uh, whether we use the dihydropyridine or the non-dihydropyridine group of drugs is very, very open to one's choice. But certainly, beta blockers cannot be used as drugs to uh, treat vasospasm. There could be that there might be some drugs which have intrinsic sympathomimetic activity, beta blockers with ISA as it's called. But then again, we will certainly not be using those group of drugs to treat coronary vasospasm in this patient population, especially if we are now thinking of a condition like a Prinzmetal angina. Dr. Suman Sharma asks, is there any role of ivabradine or beta blocker in management of HOCM? Is any study available? Well, remember that ivabradine is a drug which now is also regarded as one of the frontline drugs to treat. It's one of the cornerstones of managing heart failure patient population, especially after the results of the SHIFT study. And we understand that this is a drug which is neutral on the hemodynamics. It does not cause any lowering of blood pressure, whereas since it acts purely on the sinoatrial node or the SA node, it has a big role and a good role to control inappropriate sinus tachycardia, if at all, in patients with heart failure, where escalating beta blockers could result in lowering of blood pressure. So this is a very good subset of patients where you could actually start using ivabradine. Uh, Dr. Parol is asking, can we use rationally a combination of nitrates and beta blockers in patients with classical angina? I would think so. Why not? I mean, remember, nitrates are the drugs which are given to as palliative drugs to relieve patients of the anginal chest pain. Even though nitrates uh, as a group of drugs do not seem to have any mortality benefit in terms of the hard end core endpoints of the frontline drugs, but certainly it's a very useful drug for alleviation of chest pain in patients with angina. Dr. Mohit is asking, are beta blockers and digoxin still warranted in heart failure patients with atrial fibrillation? Can we have some other alternatives? Well, digoxin, I must tell you, still though has, by and large, it has been shunned by all of us, but there are a specific subgroup of patients where you could still use digoxin in, especially again, as I told you, that where you think adding beta blockers, uh, drugs like beta blockers, amiodarone, etc., are still not considered safe enough to for the hemodynamics, or maybe considering that there could be other organ effects, side effects of using drugs like amiodarone, digoxin still has utility in patients of heart failure with atrial fibrillation, with LV dysfunction, especially who have very borderline hemodynamics, are in kind of heart failure or refractory heart failure, which is not tending to improve. And there are no other interventional means available to stabilize these patients. Digoxin still finds a relative place in bringing about, though a temporary palliation in the medical condition of these patients. So I would certainly not discard or shun away, throw away digoxin, but I would still tend to use it very, very sparingly and judiciously in this subset of the patient population. LV dysfunction, AF with fast rates, refractoriness to medical treatments, other medical drugs, hemodynamics not very favorable, no advanced interventional options available to treat patients. So there, I would think that digoxin could be used in this set of patient population. Well, I think I have answered all the questions, and if there are none more, then I guess, are we done for the day?
Yes, sir, there are no further questions. So, with your permission, shall we conclude the session?
I'm okay. There are still 27 minutes left, but if it's okay, then we are fine.
Okay, okay, sir. So, on behalf of organizer, I would like to thank you for your insightful and educative talk. Thank you, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
So, I'm ending the meeting now. Thank you.
Thank you all for attending. Thank you.